morning. Welcome to 1111. I'm Tom McDermott, the pastor of the 1111 community. And yes, I am in my car this morning, driving as I'm welcoming you. I forgot to get the welcome little video clip earlier today to our editor, so I'm doing it from my car. Isn't that exciting? And I am being careful, more or less. It's kind of bumpy right now. So I'm glad you're with us, especially if you're visiting with us for the first time. This is a little bit unusual, but it's kind of fun. But if you're visiting with us first time, we'd love to send you one of our 1111 tumblers. So make sure you give us your address and we'll get one of those out to you. And while you're registering your attendance, when I make a note, point you to the fact that you can give online and continue to support the ministries of First United Methodist Church, as well as supporting this ministry, 1111, and its production costs and such. So we appreciate your financial support on that. A couple of things real quick to announce. First of all, Crafting Difficult Conversations. We've been having great groups, great discussions on Monday nights at 7 o'clock. We always have these interesting presenters who bring difficult topics to talk about. We have differing opinions. How do we come together in conversation in a way that's friendly and that is helpful? And that's what we do. And it's always fun and it's always interesting and oftentimes quite enlightening. So you can find us at zoom.fumcfw.org/9 at 7 p.m. Monday nights. Check it out this week. We'd love to see you. Then secondly, there's a workshop on May the 2nd. You can get more information about that at the church, but it's featuring Amy Oden, who is the author of Right Here, Right Now, Christian Mindfulness Practices. Invite you to be a part of that. Again, go to the church website, find out more information of that, or contact Dr. Linda Loney, who is hosting that. So here's where we are. We are in Eastertide. We are in the wake of resurrection and thinking about how to understand resurrection in this 21st century that we're in a new way, resurrecting the idea of resurrection. So this morning, I want to think with you on how we participate, how we co-create with resurrection, how we co-create in all of our moments and bring about new ways of encountering one another, of relating to one another in ways that bring about life. How we bring life to life, in particular as we think about lilies, trolls, and love. So I better turn this off and focus on driving. See you in a minute.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, or lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come, yet again.
Good morning. We're so glad that you are here, a part of the 1111 community, no matter where you've been or what you've been doing, or if this is your first time or your 500th time. We're just glad that you're here this morning. This morning we're going to be talking about the darkness and the light, and how do we go from really disappointing, grief-filled, dark times in life to being able to once again see that there is light and to be living into that light. Not diminishing the darkness, not forgetting about the darkness, but carrying it with us. How do these things happen? How is it that we are able to carry on? And so we're so glad that you're here. So may we lift our voices together in this moment of prayer. O Holy One, you are the ground of our being. You are the air that we breathe. You are the life within us and around us. May we be true, O God, to who we are. May we be true to who we are called to be. May we be true by working for justice, for being present in the darkness, but always seeking the light. And may we be agents of peace and love to all those who surround us on this day and in all the days to come. We pray all of these things in the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.
First things first, I'ma say all the words inside my head. I'm fired up and tired of the way that things have been. Oh, ooh, the way that things have been. Oh, ooh. Second things second, don't you tell me what you think that I can be. I'm the one at the sail, I'm the master of my sea. Oh, ooh, the master of my sea. Oh, ooh. I was broken from a young age, taking my sulking to the masses, writing my poems for the few that looked at me, took to me, shook to me, feeling me, singing from heartache, from the pain, taking my message from the veins, speaking my lesson from the brain, seeing the beauty through the... Hey, you made me up, you made me a believer, believer. Hey, you break me down, you build me up, believer, believer. Hey, oh, let the bullets fly, oh, let them rain. My life, my love, my drive, it came from... Hey, you made me a believer, believer. There are things that send a prayer to the ones up above. All the hate that you heard has turned your spirit to a dove. Oh, ooh, your spirit up above. Oh, ooh. I was choking in the crowd, building my rain up in the cloud, falling like ashes to the ground, hoping my feelings they would drown, but they never did. Ever let flow, and it limited till it broke up and it rained down. It rained down like... Hey, you made me a believer, believer. Hey, you break me down, you build me up, believer, believer. Hey, oh, let the bullets fly, oh, let them rain. My life, my love, my drive, they came from... Hey, you made me a believer, believer. Last things last, by the grace of the fire and the flames. You're the face of the future, the blood in my veins. Oh, ooh, the blood in my veins. Oh, ooh. But they never did ever let everything flow, and it inhibited, limited till it broke up and it rained down. It rained down like... Hey, you made me a believer, believer. Hey, you break me down, you build me up, believer, believer. Hey, oh, let the bullets fly, oh, let them rain. My life, my love, my drive, they came from... Hey, you made me a believer, believer.
So first of all, Brad, thank you for that. I mean, gee, that was amazing. I love that song, Pain, Believer. And I'm just going to leave it with you all to think about the connections as we think about what we're talking about today and this idea of resurrection. And in particular, part 2 of this 3-part series I'm doing on resurrection, on being in the wake of resurrection, Eastertide, what that means. Last week we talked about seeing texts in new, lively, enlivening, performative ways that speak to the moment, that help us find our story in the larger story. We're continuing with that today as we think about resurrection, and we think about what if God is like that gardener? God is that creative force in the very ground of our being that we participate in. So we're going to think about that. I'm calling this one Lilies, Trolls, and Love. So we're looking at resurrection in a resurrected way. And I want to tell you a story to get us started. A story about death. Because what's a better way to start off and talk about resurrection? So these 3 guys are sitting around a table and they're thinking about, what their funeral would be like. They just said, well, what would you think when you're there in the casket and it's open and they're looking at you? What would you like people to say about you? Interesting question. And so the first one says, well, when they look in, I'd like them to say, here was a guy that lived his life to the fullest and encouraged others to do the same. They all said, that's kind of cool, nice. They looked at the second friend and said, what about you? And he said, well, I would like people to look in and I hope they would say, here's somebody who was really nice. Everybody really liked him.
I said, oh, that's kind of cool too. And they looked at the third one and said, what would you want them to say? And he said, well, I would like them when they look in to look down and go, hey, he's moving. So, you know, does this speak to something? I know it's a joke, but does it speak to something? Does it speak to that's part of resurrection, which is really rooted in our fear, which is really rooted in our biological evolutionary fear that we just, you know, mortality is a frightening kind of thing. And how much of life is really motivated by this fear? In fact, I would say that this story speaks to both sides of that, kind of the two sides of this fear of mortality, which is represented in this little story about the rabbi who was on his deathbed and he was crying, and his disciples said, Rabbi, are you afraid of dying? And he said, no, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of having not lived enough. I'm afraid of not having lived. What really is at the root of our anxieties? Does this speak to a deeper fear of lack, that we don't have enough of this, that we don't have enough connection, that we lack enough beauty, that we lack enough talent or enough money or enough of everything going right for us? Does it speak to our human condition? This is where I think the story I want to read to you that comes from the Gospel of Matthew this morning as we think about resurrection. I want to particularly think about this text. And it's a familiar one. It's in the Gospel of Matthew during the Sermon of the Mount. It's right after Jesus has done the Beatitudes, that whole section, as he talked about this ethic of selflessness, this ethic of connecting with those who are poor, connecting with peace, or this path of shalom. And so now he says, therefore, I tell you, don't be anxious about your life, about what you eat or what you drink, or what you wear, your body. Don't be anxious about these things, because look at the birds. They don't worry, they don't sow, they don't reap, but yet God somehow provides. And then look at the lilies of the field. I love the phrase, consider the lilies of the field. Lilies is such a great image, right, for resurrection anyway, Easter lilies and such. But consider the lilies of the field. They grow, but they don't toil, they don't sow, they don't spin anxiously. And yet I say even Solomon in all of his glory never looked as beautiful as one of these. So I say to you, God clothes the grass and the field, which today is here, but tomorrow is gone. So how much more will God clothe and take care of you, you of little faith? So don't worry about these things, but instead seek first the kingdom of God, and all these other things shall come into place. When I first heard that, when I used to read that story years ago, maybe even more recently, I always thought about this story as speaking to this existential anxiety that we have about life, that we typically have, that kind of moves us through life day to day, and then how we think about this dualistic understanding of the God who is out there, the supernatural kind of being or deity that comes and takes care of us in times of trouble. And surely that's at the root of a lot of our faith. And yet I want to suggest there's something much more going on here that is less dualistic and more non-dual, something more of which we are a part of, even as God is a part of, or even as the ground of our being is a part of this. And this is this idea of the creative presence at the very ground of our being, the resurrective presence. Is resurrective a word? Resurrection presence at the ground of our being. So that rather than being motivated by fear, which really, if you think about it, motivated by fear is not resurrection. Motivated by something, resurrection is about another kind of motivation that we'll get to and talk about. What is Jesus saying here that might be different? I want to tell you a quick story about when I was at Camp Care in North Carolina, south of Asheville, years ago. One of the guests they brought to the camp was this trapeze artist, and he brought a couple of his colleagues, and they set up a trapeze outside, and it was part of the whole experience, kind of like a ropes course. It was part of the whole experience of the camp week. And of course, the counselors participated in it as well as the campers. And it was interesting because you have to let go of the trapeze as you're swinging from one post. And we had the net. We had the net there because most of us fell. Most of us did not get across to the other swing. But as you're swinging across, the swings are just beyond reach when they come to that point at the center. And so there is this leap, right? I mean, this metaphorical and real leap. And the trapeze artists would speak, because they would go without nets, but they would speak of their training that teaches them this moment of letting go. And that in this moment of letting go, you learn to see past your fears, and you learn to see how everything else is operating together. So that when the other trapeze comes to this point they call the still point, you're releasing just ahead of that still point, and there's this level of trust in that still point that frees you up. He said it's the most ecstatic, freeing moment, because you realize whatever happens, you've got to experience that moment. And that lets go of all the fear. He said the worst thing you can do is at that moment suddenly feel afraid. He said you let go of that, and then you reach out, and there it is. Not always, obviously, but in most cases, yes. Jesus says, look at the lilies, consider the lilies. Stop worrying about what you acquire or don't acquire, what you succeed at, don't succeed at, how you look or don't look. Get out of your own way, we said last week. Love is the creative center of being that invites us to be who we are, where we are, to live out of this love and to return to this love. Like the lilies of the field, like your enemies, like your own self and your own life. Love is at the very source of all of this. And in letting go, we find our deepest joys and delights. We find this even in the midst of the frailty. Rumi says, don't seek for love, right? You remember the poem? Don't seek for love, but instead seek to remove all the barriers you have created against it. The way Rainer Maria Rilke, the German poet we talked about last week, what he says is, make your ego porous. Will is of little importance. Complaining is nothing. Fame is nothing. Openness, patience, receptivity, solitude is everything. Make your ego porous. These moments, these people, these nightmares can become co-creators on this path to a deeper wisdom. Our ability to face with wonder and curiosity, with a place of unknowing in order to experience what else is there, even in moments that seem otherwise frightening or impossible. Wisdom has this interesting etymology. If you look up the word, it comes from two root words, weed, which means this W-E-I-D, which essentially means to see or to envision something, and dum or dum, which means the very ground or sort of the connectivity of things, the foundation of things, what holds things together. So wisdom is literally seeing how things are connected, is literally seeing the wider picture of things, the wider connectivity. It's seeing into and through the obstacle to see how we are interconnected and co-creative with the very ground of all of being. The way that Albert Einstein says it in his wonderful quote, from discord, find harmony. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. I mean, has this ever been true for you? Have you ever found these moments where you find yourself up against someone, a bitterness with a coworker, or disappointment with someone, or afraid of someone, or perhaps in this nightmarish situation? I know that when I was first talking to a group of campers at one of these camps, in my first experience, they'd asked me to tell ghost stories, and I opened up the ghost story with this line of, have you ever been really afraid? And then I looked around at all these campers who are experiencing cancer, and it was just like this hit in the head, right? Fortunately for me, they were gracious and smiling and saying, boy, have you got a lot to learn, which of course I did have a lot to learn, and which of course they learned a lot as well. But this idea of how we find life in the midst of the obstacle. There's a great old story that comes out of the Brothers Grimm. It's called The Water of Life. A king has 3 sons, 3 princes, and he's dying. And he tells his 3 sons, I need the water of life to live. I'm immediately reminded, when I first read that, I was immediately reminded of the story of the woman at the well, and Jesus, who comes to the Samaritan woman, and he's getting water, and she says, let me draw the water from the well. I'm getting this from my people. This is Jacob's well. And then Jesus says, I have water, living water. If you knew that, you would want the water that I have, living water. And I was reminded of that as I heard this story of the king telling his sons, bring me the water of life. And you know, these stories are really about us individually. All the different characters are aspects of who we are. And so there's the first son who's handsome and he's strong. And there's the second prince who is wise who is smart and clever. And then there's the third, who is kind of a dumbling. He's kind of a goofy and simple-minded. And so each one in their own turn goes and tries to find this water of life, and they come to a bridge where a troll comes out, and the first one, who is strong and handsome, looks at the disgusting troll and says, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Get out of my way. And of course he can't, because he hasn't faced the obstacle. He's refused the obstacle. And so what happens is, of course, they end up in a struggle, and he's tossed into the river, and the prince floats down the river stream, disappears. And when the second son, the smart one, shows up, he figures he can outsmart the troll. Again, just disgusted by the troll and has no interest in the troll, but the troll outsmarts him, and once again, the next thing we see is the second son headed down the river and disappearing. When neither of the sons show up, the third son, the simpleton, he looks around him and he says, well, I guess I don't know how to find this well, but I guess it's up to me now. And so he heads out. And I love how this story progresses, because if you read the story, the simpleton just makes his way through the village and out into the countryside, and he's not too anxious about things. He's simply just trying to find this place. And he's whistling and meeting everyone along the way. And like all good stories, the more attentive we are to the people around us, the more help we receive in finding our way through these obstacles. They're like the wise ones, like the gifts of insights, like the key of knowledge. And so he finds his way to the bridge and to the troll. And when he meets the troll, he simply says, hi. And he says, who are you? And the troll introduces himself. I'm the guardian of the bridge. And who are you? What are you doing here? And he says, he tells him his story and about his father's illness, and that he's hoping to find the water of life to give to his to give to his father. And the troll, he asks the troll why he's there. And the troll speaks of his own troubles that landed him on this bridge. And in the process, they get to know each other in a way. And the troll befriends the troll, and the troll helps him find the water of life. And of course, he takes the bucket of water back to his father, and his father's life is saved. You have trolls in your life, right? I mean, we all have trolls in our lives. We know what that's like. Dealing with difficult people, challenging times, challenging moments, a loss of a job, this pandemic that we're in. We all have these troll-like obstacles and moments. This is the opportunity, though, of seeing the obstacles we set between us and the presence of love. Wisdom knows the difference. Wisdom sees past the immediate and sees the bigger picture. Wisdom knows the difference between seeing others and experiences as the obstacle, and instead seeing the defenses and judgments and biases we bring to that obstacle that creates a barrier that prevents us from moving through. Wisdom can see the difference. But approaching the experience and the emotions and the problem with a kind of openness, receptivity, we begin to see instead the stranger first as a part of ourselves. How is the stranger really a part of me that I simply don't know yet? I simply don't understand. We approach the moments with open-heartedness, and we begin to recognize our shared creativity in this moment, in this existence. Rather than a zero-sum narrative which is either or, win or lose, we see there are other possibilities. We find something new we didn't see before. We are in the wake of resurrection, and we smile. Thomas Merton said once, he was the Nobel Peace Prize and Jesuit monk, and he said, if I find God, I will find myself. And if I find myself, I will find God. And even more importantly, that when I see God in the other, I will see myself in the other. There's a final story I want to just share with you real quick. When I took a group with my friend Jay Staley, we took a group over to Ireland, Northern Ireland, back in 2017. And in a couple of years, we're going to take another group to Scotland, hopefully in 2022. But we took a group to Northern Ireland with the purpose of sort of creating a labyrinth in this town called Clones on the border of Northern Ireland and the Republic. So it was a border town that straddled the border. And we wanted to create a labyrinth there. You know, one of the labyrinths, one of its gifts is this ability to walk this path until you have let go of what you brought into it and find yourself at the center of the labyrinth, like the center of the wheel, like the hub of a wheel, empty, or like a bowl, empty, so that you can then receive. But going in, we often take so much in there that it's difficult, and we lose patience. And so we were there, and we built this labyrinth. I'll show a picture of it. We did it in the ground. We kind of mowed out a labyrinth. And turns out the community liked it so much that they made it a permanent labyrinth. But one night, we got to be with this woman, Hannah Chew. And Hannah Chew has been a part of the reconciliation movement in Ireland for years and years and years in Northern Ireland. And So she created these workshops, and she has a hedgerow labyrinth. There's a picture of it. And in this hedgerow labyrinth basically is the same thing. You walk this labyrinth. She would bring together communities from both sides of the conflict, Protestant and Catholic, British and Irish born. And she would bring them together simply for the purpose of conversations. But before they would have these conversations, they would have to walk the labyrinth. And she would encourage them to walk the labyrinth until they were able to come out with fresh eyes, with openness. And some could not. I mean, obviously some couldn't. There were these two women, both of whose sons had died in the Troubles and on either side of the conflict. And they knew that about each other, and they kept their distance from each other the whole time, she said. But one of them was walking that labyrinth, and she came out, and then she just turned around and kept walking. And she ended up walking that labyrinth 4 times until she finally came out, and you could see it in her face, tears streaming from her eyes. And she went over to the other woman, and she said, "I'm sorry. I understand." And that opened a bridge between the two of them that built a friendship, she said. What does it mean to consider the lilies of the field? To recognize our frailty, to recognize our mortality, to recognize that our moments aren't always as predictable and controllable as we'd like, and yet we participate in these moments. One moment, one choice. Ichi go, ichi a. We have this chance to see life as co-creators. Essentially, we're all on this path. No one escapes it, but only those who open up to it, lose themselves in it, experience the freedom of the fearlessness and the joy, the trapeze moment, that stillness. This is where God is in the mud. This is where the lotus blooms in the mud, the detritus in the garden and the seed, the manure and the new life. The moment of vulnerability, of letting down our knowing, that vulnerable moment just before truly entrusting ourselves in the ground of being, that can be a deeply terrifying moment. That moment just before we meet what scares us. And there's no sin that we human beings wouldn't try to do to avoid it. No allegiance against it or denial of our interdependence with the other. But the moment after that, that is another matter. When the obstacles are finally invited into our lives like a guest house, curious and open to wonder that what they might bring to this garden we participate in. And soon enough, something else starts blooming, the wake of the resurrection. Next Sunday, I'm going to talk about how we actually practice that with resurrection is about participation. But for now, I want to just think about this wisdom that opens us up to the co-creative at the very ground of our being, where we find lilies and manure and trolls and life and death and breath. And that sudden moment then that we let go, and of course, we smile.
My heart is spilling over, crashing on the ground. I can't see what's around me, but soon I will be found. My faith is in the bounds of the million tiny words, so I return to silence. And if I see a sign in the sky tonight, no one's gonna tell me it's a trick of the light. May never come, but I'm willing to wait. What can I say? I'm a man of the faith, and there's an ocean in my body, there's a river in my soul, and I'm crying. It's time that I let go of things I can't control, and this path that I have taken is the only one I know. Well, I've come so far to get here, and I've got so far to go. So I take what I can get in matters of the soul. And if I see a sign in the sky tonight, no one's gonna tell me it's a trick of the light. May never come, but I'm willing to wait. What can I say? I'm a man of the faith, and there's an ocean in my body, and there's a river in my soul, and and we carry the sun. And we are the dawn, and we carry the sun. If I see a sign in the sky tonight, no one's gonna tell me it's a trick on the light. May never come, but I'm willing to wait. What can I say? I'm a man of the faith. And there's an ocean in my body, and there's a river in my soul, and I'm